And good afternoon. Welcome to the program. Charles Moscowitz here. And my guest is Patrick Wood. He is the founder and director of Citizens for Free Speech, a nation of defenders. Patrick, thanks for joining me this afternoon.
Hey, my pleasure. Good to be with you.
Patrick, first of all, let's just start with a thumbnail on what is the mission and the message of Citizens for Free Speech.
Well, absolutely. We are concerned with the First Amendment and not only defending but supporting the First Amendment and all of its elements. There's 5 different elements within the First Amendment that supposedly give us the right to communicate properly with each other and with our government. We have freedom of expression of religion, of course. We have freedom of speech. We have freedom of the press. We have the right to assemble peaceably. And we have the right to request the government for grievances. And all of these, as a whole, represent our ability to communicate with each other and with our government. These are basic freedoms. This is the heartbeat of the Bill of Rights. It's the heartbeat of our civil liberties. And it's under massive attack, a full spectrum attack on every element today. Much not exclusively because of COVID-19, but a lot of it now is coming to bear as a result of this. And so we're in the battle of our life right now for America. If we lose the ability to communicate, we lose everything downstream from that. And the founders of the Constitution put the First Amendment there for a reason, because they understood what I just said. They also put the Second Amendment there for a reason as well, because they say if you lose the first, you're going to meet the second. I don't want to go there. In discussion,
No.
People will understand what I just said, I think.
I get the drift. And also, I mean, certainly the whole principle, the governing principle, the philosophy behind the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence is that it recognizes rights that are viewed as inherent, that are viewed as inalienable, that are viewed as natural, and that emanate from God, of course, the Creator, and not from the state. That is the governing principle of the American Republic. Now, you are mentioning the abrogation and the infringement on those basic rights, the 5 rights that are named in the First Amendment, due to the coronavirus pandemic and the emergency around that. The justification for that, of course, and it's a complex issue, is that this is a highly communicable disease that can spread from person to person, and that people are going to become very sick. They're going to end up in the hospital. There'll be a huge death rate. So thus, the government needs to take emergency measures to make sure that we are separate from each other. So under the present condition and under the circumstances, which I think is largely true, how do you address that in juxtaposition to our rights? What would be the proper role of government in this time of emergency?
Well, there's in my view, there's 2 issues that we're concerned with here. And I'd like to separate those issues just for the sake of discussion. The first issue is the virus itself. Is there a virus? Yes. Is it causing a problem? Yes. And we've dealt with many viruses in the past. The American public should understand the whole concept of viruses and the flu and how serious it can get, how quickly somebody can get sick and go into hospital and get in big trouble, and how it affects other health systems that we have in our body. I've had people tell me that, well, I had flu and it settled in this organ or it settled in a muscle or my neck or whatever, and gave them horrible trouble. Well, it's a complicated issue for sure. But we have the virus on one hand, and then we have what I'm calling the Great Panic of 2020 on the other. And the people that first started this, quote unquote, what I call the Great Panic of 2020, the people that started this are, and as a class, I'll use, we haven't documented this yet to get it out, but I'll call them technocrats for the sake of anything better. The people that created the first computer models that kind of like yelling fire in a crowded theater, that we're going to lose 1.2 million people in America, and we're going to lose 500,000 people in Great Britain. The world just absolutely went overboard on those computer models that were not verified. In fact, that particular computer model has been totally dismantled by other scientist, computer scientist, is saying it's just not suitable for scientific purpose. This originated at the Imperial College in London. A professor by the name of Neil Ferguson actually was the guy who created this computer model. As it turns out, he's a lousy computer programmer, and he's also an epidemiologist, doesn't have medical training per se. Mm-hmm. And this whole meme that we have today, that the world is going to die, whatever, it mimics what we saw with all of the climate alarmism panic that we've had in the last few years, especially in Europe and Great Britain and in our country too, to a certain extent. And this panicking of the public to accept controls that would not normally be there is legendary in global circles for globalization. We've had this applied to us in our country. So there's two problems. There's the virus, which is a problem, and it's out there. But we also have these people who are using that scenario to put the bite on us to do stuff that may not have any scientific basis whatsoever to do it. And that's kind of our point here as we're talking about this article, the miserable pseudoscience behind face masks, social distancing, and contact tracing. They are the ones that say they have the science, that we need to do what science says. But if social distancing does not have the science behind it, true science that they say it does, then what does that make their argument? Well, all of a sudden it starts to fall flat. Well, why are you requiring it then if the science doesn't say that it's effective? There must be another reason. Well, they can't find another reason. It's just like we want you to do what we tell you to do. And you know, as far as the Constitution is concerned, there's big conflict here because, these are basic rights we have. I heard one commentator say something to the effect that, well, wearing face masks doesn't violate your constitutional rights. And I say, have you ever read the Constitution? Have you ever thought about the Constitution? Who can understand anybody wearing face masks? I can't understand people.
Right. I mean, we kind of have a custom, if not a literal constitutional right, to see people, to be able to, it's like when you're in a court, you need to see someone's face because that's how we communicate. I mean, the issue came up actually with the face coverings by Muslims when they first came here, that you couldn't have your face covered if you were taking a picture for your license. Now, I think you bring up a good point here, Patrick, about the some of the hysteria around global warming, that a lot of this was based on computer projections. It wasn't really hard science. It wasn't anything that could be shown. And a lot of the data that was gathered only started to be gathered probably right after World War II, maybe into the 1950s. But as far as the pandemic goes, I mean, the argument that's being made is that these projections made by this guy Ferguson in England, if they had not been followed, then there would have been millions of people dead because we would not have taken the necessary precautions of social distancing, and we would have been more exposed. Now, I mean, I think that has proven to be untrue by the example of Sweden, which did not follow the rule of social distancing, and which did protect, I believe, the most vulnerable members of their society, people who are over 80 in nursing homes or people who have heart disease and pre-existing conditions. And they just simply, the rest of society continue to function as normal. And yes, I think there is a slightly larger number there of deaths, but it's not all that dramatically different from societies that completely shut down. So, the science maybe is not there. And the other thing you bring up that I think is interesting is that we have come to almost worship science, as if science is the ultimate arbiter of that which is true. And science is something it's in a young stage. I mean, it's something that changes its mind through research as much as almost anything else. It's not, and it can be, as we found out, very politicized. It's not necessarily hard, objective science, although that certainly does exist. So, so the end result is that we are cowering and we're locked in our homes, and we're living in a state of virtual martial law, basically medical martial law.
I think that's right. I don't use that term a lot myself, but I do agree with it. It is kind of a soft medical martial law where people are officials are telling us what we can and cannot do. The idea of mass, for instance, there's so many things that have not been taken into consideration with that meme. For instance, 40% of the population in America are hard of hearing. That's a fact. That is scientific fact. Just look at the number of hearing aids. I have hearing aids. Look at the number of people wearing hearing aids or should be wearing hearing aids. I've talked to several people, even just recently, that are hard of hearing. And they tell me, and I've said this before, but they tell me without prompting that they have learned how to read lips along the way. It's just that they didn't take class for it, but they always watch the person's lips who are speaking to them if they're hard of hearing. And that's how they get the majority of content into their brain, what that person is saying. Even if they can't hear all the words, they get a few, they see the lips move and they know, pick out a few words, and they can get the sense of what the person is saying. When you wear a mask, you don't have the ability to read somebody's lips. What does that do for all the people out there that are hard of hearing that can't understand what anybody's saying without looking at their lips? This is so basic and fundamental. I hear people in the grocery store, like in front of me at line, where the cashier's wearing this big old face mask, and there's some, maybe guy that's 65, 70 years old, and she's trying to talk to him like, well, do you have a coupon? Do you have your phone number or something? What did you say? I can't understand. Could you say it louder? And finally, they just, rip the thing off their face, and they talk to him normally, and then the people can hear it. But Americans, talk about a basic fundamental human right. Everybody has the ability to communicate with people. And, it's just so easy to throw holes in this. It's a political agenda. It's not a scientific agenda here. It's a political agenda.
Well, on the other hand, it is expectorant that spreads the virus, from person to person. So, as long as we have this virus, I think we have to be careful. My problem with it is when it becomes a mandate and when you have arbitrary laws put in place.
Yes.
Now, under the guise of the emergency, and it is an emergency, you have overreach by governors particularly. And the president actually has been pretty conservative about this in terms of not calling out, and making it into, and people goading him into turning out the army and, declaring a national state of martial law. Instead, he worked with the governors, but some of the governors have really turned into tyrants. It's real autocratic. Whether it be banning the right to buy plant seed in a grocery store, and you can't drive with only one person in the car, or whether it be in the converse, forcing by executive order people with COVID-19 positive into nursing homes, as Governor Cuomo did in New York, which was directly responsible for the deaths of thousands of people.
Yes.
And, he has yet to explain that policy. He tried to blame the federal government, but no, the federal government had a law saying that you cannot do that unless a nursing home is completely equipped to handle such a thing, which in New York State, none of them were. So, you have these terrible autocratic fiat acts by governors acting as if they're dictators and drunk with power. And this is the danger and the downside of dealing with what actually is an emergency, and it is a health emergency. What say you?
Well, when a health emergency becomes a political emergency, we have trouble. That's all I can say.
Right.
There is a health issue. I can't possibly deny that there isn't a virus that's very serious out there that's raising some havoc. But, when I was young, I lived through the Hong Kong flu.
I remember it.
One of the nastiest ones that ever came through during, at least since 1950. And the Hong Kong flu, we got through it. We got over it. A bunch of people died. A bunch of people got sick that recovered too. And we're never quite the same again. They had stuff happen to them. And and they never fully recovered. They still, have lingering health problems with their lungs and so on. But America got through the Hong Kong flu. I won't say just fine. People did die. I don't want to make fun of that. They did die. But we got through it as a nation without shutting down the entire economic system of our country. The results of which today have caused far more havoc than would ever have been caused by the virus if we did nothing at all. So now we have millions of people out of work. We have hundreds of thousands of companies going out of business that are going to maybe never be able to have the right kind of job again. And we've got people, the homeless rate is going up like crazy in some places. And, all of these other societal effects because of political meddling with society. And here's the big problem. All of these other things never were put into the computer model. Well, what if we did shut down the economic system? What would be the impact? We've got people here in Arizona who should have been in the hospital getting diagnostic tests done. They're scared to death to go to the hospital.
It's a terrible problem.
Position starting to lay people off. They won't. The patients won't come to the hospital, and they die at home of a heart attack or something. Because they should have been having a heart test.
I definitely can see that happening, and I think that the psychological effect on people, including some people that I know, in that they're so frightened and so cowed by this that they're just having a meltdown, even touching a doorknob or going out and coming too close to someone. I think there's a slang term for this. They call them Karens. People who are so. We were at a grocery store about several weeks back, and there was a woman who became so frightened and so panicked that everybody had to clear out of the entire aisle so she could get through. And it's a hysteria that's hitting people, and they are scared. And there's a lot of misinformation out there that it makes me wonder if the government isn't trying to milk this thing in order to consolidate power.
They are. I believe they are, personally. That's the only way I can see it. I'd like to see it some other way, honestly, but I can't see it any other way. And the people, there are some governors that are doing much better than others, I have to say, at least a few. But by and large, what's happened between governors and mayors and some county officials is that anybody that was predisposed to be kind of like an autocrat, just to be a bully, like Bill de Blasio, for instance, they're coming out of the woodwork because there's no resistance against them. And so they have been doing things that you never would have expected a year ago. Like our governor is a Republican, Doug Ducey. He's supposedly, kind of conservative, but then again, he's kind of a globalist too. But we never would have expected a year ago that he would order the things with executive orders that he has done in our state. And we're mostly a red state still. Well, the people that are predisposed to that kind of behavior have always kind of been held in check by a number of things. But now they have no resistance, and they come out of the woodwork. Hey, we're going to do this. We're going to do that. We've got a health emergency. Boy, I've been waiting for a good project to get my hands into, and this is it. And, we're going to start mandating all people should do this and they should do this. They don't necessarily consult with anybody who's got their head screwed on right in this whole thing. No. They go to the health department, like in our state, they go to the director of health here, who's kind of a technocrat along the lines of an Anthony Fauci. And I've got nothing against scientists and epidemiologists or doctors or whatever. They have a proper advisory role in government. They really do. And I want good scientist brains to advise our politicians. But when they're given the full reign on policy making, they're not elected. These people aren't elected necessarily. When they're given the reins for policy formation, all of a sudden that's outside the political process altogether. They have no restraints. They have no restraints on it for the Constitution, for instance, or for any other legal precedent. They don't have attorneys coming to advise them on, well, is this really legal? Can you do this or whatever? They just make the declaration, figure shoot first, ask questions later.
That's right. And we elected government to take responsibility for administration, not not these unelected bureaucrats like Fauci and others.
Yes.
And Patrick Wood, so, I expected that this whole thing would be over by now, especially as the weather gets warmer. And when the government passes bad laws, I think it was Attorney General Doherty under Coolidge, who once famously said that the best way to get rid of a bad law is to enforce it. And I thought that with the weather getting better, with people wanting to go to the beach, with them wanting to go out, they want to go to restaurants, that this whole thing would collapse and that everything would, no matter what the government did, everything would go back to normal. But that doesn't seem to be happening. And what worries me is that now there's talk, at least in my own home state of Massachusetts here, about not opening college campuses in the fall and not having any events. I mean, I don't know. Are we going to see the end of it? I mean, I have a feeling we are going to see the end of it. And that end of it is going to be the day after the election when Donald Trump loses. Then it'll be over. But let's putting that aside.
Be right there.
Yeah. But I mean, what's now they're claiming that various states, including Arizona, by the way, is seeing an uptick in cases.
Yeah.
So once again, we're running for the shelters. Everybody's going back inside and they're sheltering again. What are we to do as citizens, and how are we to find out reliably what's going on here?
Reliability is a problem. I wish I could trust some numbers from anybody at this point. I mean, you just have the itch. Can anybody just give me a real number? You just can't really trust anything that the media is saying right now about statistics and stuff. Where did they come from? Where are they how are they compiling these numbers? Is everybody on the same page with with how they count somebody as being infected? These answers just aren't out there. And enough of the things that are happening have been disproven as to be greatly exaggerated, or like when the nursing home scandal finally came out. I mean, that wasn't understood on day one. It took a while before people started figuring out, why are they cramming these people into nursing homes that have no hospital facilities to care for these people?
Right. Terrible.
And all of the other people in the nursing home get sick and half of them die. Well, people started to figure that out. And now it's like, holy mackerel, did we get screwed on that one?
Yeah, it's a big scandal.
So
nobody
trusts the numbers anymore. And it makes it really difficult to get a good read on it. But in Arizona, at least, I'm watching the hospitals and just to see how many beds are free, how many people are being admitted, that sort of thing. And even then, you really don't have an accurate understanding of what's going on inside the hospital.
Now, we're told that people who went out to go to church are, at least in my neck of the woods, that they're evil and that they're stupid, and that people in Michigan who were in parts of the state that had 0 cases, who wanted to get back to work, they protesting in Lansing, they were stupid, they were ignorant. And yet, when there is a couple of instances of police brutality against black men, which is terrible, but which becomes a very much a magnified situation, then it's perfectly okay for tens of thousands of people to go out and rally and protest all over the country, which probably is the cause for the uptick. It's an example of the arbitrariness of this sort of enforcement. I mean, in the case of the protests, you had people like the governor of Michigan herself out protesting, while on the other hand, they're trying to put people in prison. Just several weeks earlier, you had Mitt Romney here out protesting with Black Lives Matter. I mean, you had people going out who are high levels of government. I mean, in a way, it exposes the arbitrariness and the fiat aspect of government enforcement.
Yes, it really does. And I've said frequently now that we're living in an age of lawlessness. And the reason I say that is to compare it to the original rule of law that Americans labored under for so many decades and centuries, that the law would be applied fairly to every citizen, and that there would be a law that would be published so that everybody understood what was right and what was wrong as far as the society was concerned. That's what Congress is all about. That's what the state houses are all about, is to make laws and make them public, make them obvious to people. But today we live in a lawless society where people are making their own laws as they go, whether it be the Supreme Court in a sense, or whether it be somebody, some other governor or whatever. And nobody's asking the question, well, is this stuff really right or not? So we have Congress that makes laws. The agencies of the administrative branch turn those into regulations, like the EPA, for instance, or other agencies. They turn them into regulations that are backed by the statutes that are passed in Congress. They say, okay, we all agree to that. We'll follow those regulations. But now, all of the stuff we're talking about here is not based even on, there's no law, but it's not based even on regulations. It's based on guidelines. Guidelines have been called suggestions. Are we a country that is ruled by suggestions? You see, this is lawlessness. This is not, if you want a law to do something, go pass a law for Pete's sake and we'll follow it. But we don't follow suggestions and guidelines. I don't care how wise they are. If the guidelines are good, take them to Congress and get a law passed. And that's the way it's going to be. But they can't do that, or they won't do that. It's more fun for them maybe just to write an executive order and say, this, and this, go do it, or throw you in jail.
Okay, my guest is Patrick Wood. He's with Citizens for Free Speech. And of course, they're at citizensforfreespeech.org. Patrick, what's happening here and what you're talking about is something that's been happening in this society for many decades, and now it's really becoming exposed, which is ruled by bureaucrats, ruled by unelected, faceless agencies. I think it started really in this country in a major way after the election of 1912. And when you had agencies being set up outside of the government that had sovereign rights, agencies like the Federal Reserve. I don't want to get into a big topic about that, but you had all these other things, the UN, you had NGOs, you had, on the state level as well, these various sovereign agencies that would come in and would make laws, but they call them something else. They call them directives, suggestions, indexes. They all have these euphemisms. And then they would come in and start enforcing them without any accountability. The American Constitution says that only the U.S. Congress shall make laws, not the president, not the Supreme Court. And on the state level, it's the legislators working with the governors that are to make laws. But they've transferred those powers. They've transferred them over to these other bureaucracies. And now they feel that they can come in and do this without any legislative oversight, with any proper procedure, with got to let the people be heard through the elected representatives. It's all fiat power, and that's an issue here. And I think that's what you're describing. It's very troubling. Now, Patrick, it was former Obama Chief of Staff Rahm Emanuel who famously said, "Don't ever let a good crisis go to waste." And you could look this up on YouTube. He actually said it on one of the big Sunday talk shows.
Yes.
And I think that the latest crisis, of course, are the shootings of these criminals, frankly, who should not have been killed that way. That was overreach on the part of the police. Whether it was because they were black, I don't know. It very well may be. But the fact of the matter is that it has been turned into a weaponizing of race, and the claim that America has systemic racism, which I do not believe we have. Now, they're using this as a lever to do what we're talking about here from the pandemic, develops more fiat power. Now you have to genuflect to this group, Black Lives Matter, regardless of who they are. They're getting government monies pouring in this shadowy organization. No one knows where the money's going, who's behind it. Now you have moves to defund police, to reparations for black people, a federalization of law enforcement. There's all these other agendas that are coming to the fore. And it seems, again, just like with the pandemic, that a crisis, alleged, is being exploited by people who are authoritarian in nature to try to seize more power over the lives of the citizens.
That's right.
What say you?
This is the trickle-down effect. If the government, if government can get away by making and enforcing suggestions, which they have, then Black Lives Matter can get away with the same thing. Because what's the difference? They're just people. They're not operating under anybody's authority per se. They're doing exactly the same thing. They're saying, well, you need to take a knee to Black Lives Matter, and if you don't, we will cancel you or make trouble for you. And this goes on ad infinitum, not only reparations, but, you know, there's several issues you could point to, but they're doing the very same thing that the government is doing with all the fiat guidelines they're putting out and saying you must follow those guidelines under penalty of law. Well, they don't have the penalty of law. They're just saying they do, and people are believing it, and people are knuckling under to it. And the cases that need to come to court have not yet come to court. I expect they will in time. But they're not there yet, because any court action, you know, it takes weeks, if not months, before you see any results from that kind of action. So all these things have been, you know, thrown out there. This is what you must do, and people are getting all too conditioned, I'm afraid, to simply accepting what anybody says, that you must do that, and if you don't, we'll shame you, we'll do this, that, and the other, we'll put you in jail. And this mentality has trickled down from the very top level of our government into the states, now into social movements as well.
Now, Patrick, you're the head of an organization that champions free speech, Citizens for Free Speech. So I want to just get into one more issue as we close out, and that is the phenomena of the big tech social network giants like YouTube, which is one of the streams that hosts my program, and I'm grateful for that, and Google and Facebook and Twitter and the rest, censoring conservative opinion. Now, I get the fact that you don't want to have people who are advocating violence or people who are grossly hateful toward any group. That's wrong. And I would, you know, you have to maintain a certain, you know, public square. I understand that. But I think that they have, like anyone else, they've overstepped it, and they've gotten involved with regulating speech that they don't like. And they argue that they're private companies and they have a right to do that. And it's a very difficult argument for you and I, being of libertarian orientation, to answer. But on the other hand, they have a situation where they have immunity because they claim to be a public forum, but yet they're operating as an editor of like a newspaper when they decide who gets to be heard and who doesn't get to be heard. So my question to you is, what can be done about this? It's a terrible phenomenon. They're even, you know, editing out President Trump's tweets. I mean, and for no reason that they can explain. And it's going to get worse as we move toward the election. I mean, it's going to get real ugly. I already know a few people who have been taken down from Twitter, and these are not people who are involved with, you know, radical, hateful ideologies. Mm-hmm. What do you think we can do about that?
Well, this is a case where I believe the legislature needs to step in. I don't think this is something the president can do. I don't think this is something a state government can do, because it really spans the whole country. But I would point out, every time this free speech argument is brought up by people within the Googles and the Twitters and so on, I don't know if I'm just somehow it strikes me and nobody else, but if you just think about it a minute, people would think about this. The Constitution of our country was not written for corporations, and corporations are not people. We're the people. It's our contract with the government, not theirs. And the concept of corporations came along long after, and they are not human entities like the people of our nation are. And basically, I believe they have no right to hide behind the argument, well, we're just, you know, First Amendment applies to us too. No, it doesn't. It applies to people. And as such, the government has I believe, this is one of the legitimate uses maybe of government. I believe the government has the right to regulate these companies in a way that's fair to all of Americans across the country. And it's, you know, it's kind of like the extremity of it is, kind of like with the COVID argument, should we shut down the entire country and, keep people away from hospitals that need to get there? Is that going to be better for us, or just kind of let everything work its way out? Well, these companies have undue influence at this point, and they're wrecking the rest of our constitutional, rights in the process. And this is wrong. It's wrong thinking. It's just to think that they have some equal right that we do to the First Amendment. They don't, and maybe the people within the company do, but that's another story.
Well, no, I agree with that, and I think that a corporation is basically a group of people who organize an entity, and then they enter into a partnership with a government, whether it be usually a state government, and that partnership involves certain things that are put into it that are very explicit, and in the case of these big entities like Google, those things should be freedom of speech. When they talk about community standards, they have to define what that means instead of enforcing it arbitrarily, because they do have control over something like 95% of the means of communication in this country. And they do operate in tandem, maybe not literally. I don't think they're calling each other up, but they do tend to have a very similar mindset, a very left liberal mindset. And that while they have a right to have that, they are squelching opinions that don't agree with them, because that's the nature of leftism anyways.
It is. And when a company like Google says that they're going to determine the election in November by skewing their search engine and their type ahead search box, and the articles that appear when you finally get a search thing, they know that they can manipulate people's minds and stuff with this. And when they say, we're going to get Trump out of office, we're going to determine the outcome of the election, in my mind, simple as it might be, this borders on sedition.
Oh, absolutely.
It's just like, well, you're advocating the overthrow of a legitimate government in America. And I'm sorry, that is not the political process we have in America. You are right on the edge, if not over the edge, of sedition. And if you keep it up, you're going to fall beyond that. The next step is treason. And we've had treason problems in our nation before in our history, and we've dealt with it very effectively. But these people are pushing the needle right now, in my opinion, towards sedition. Nobody's talking about that I've heard so far, but I've written a couple articles on it. I look at it, I say, you know what? These guys have shown intent to overthrow the government.
No, I mean, they're no better than the people who framed Lieutenant General Michael Flynn.
Yes.
Or who cooked up this phony conspiracy theory that President Trump is a Russian spy. I mean, you and I should do a show on this at another time, because it's a very important issue, Patrick. Patrick Wood, I want to thank you for joining me. Could you let my listeners and viewers know how they can reach you, how they can get to see your excellent website?
My pleasure. Citizensforfreespeech.org is the first place to go if you want to stand with us to defend this First Amendment. Please come and sign up, no charge. In fact, we'll even send you, if you want it, we'll send you a face mask card that you can use for opt-out if you don't need to be wearing a face mask. Secondly, my professional website is technocracy.news, and you can go there. My books are available there, and articles and stuff from around the world, and you can check that out as well. They're separate entities, but I founded Citizens for Free Speech because I studied the big tech giants, and when I realized there was some kind of collusion going on between them, could never prove it, of course, but they started nailing people as a pack. So somebody would get X'd out on Facebook, and then boom, 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 they'd disappear everywhere.
That's right.
That's curious. How does that happen?
That's how they started with Alex Jones, and that was only the canary in the mine shaft. Anyways, Patrick, again, I want to thank you for joining me. It's been a great pleasure.